Hey everyone, welcome back. Kevin McCarthy is currently trying to wrangle enough votes in the House of Representatives in order to try and pass some sort of funding bill in an attempt to avert a government shutdown. However, I imagine he's suffering from a little bit of deja vu at the moment because what's going on in the House right now looks a lot like what was happening when he was trying to get people to agree to raise the debt ceiling. Now, back then I covered all the different parties to that negotiation and talked about their motivations and how things might play out, so I figured we'd do the same right now, because some of the players have learned a little bit from last time and they've updated their negotiating strategy accordingly. Let's start off with the people who are at the heart of this problem, the Freedom Caucus and a few other far-right members of the Republican Conference. Now, their position really hasn't changed that much. They still want to see a lot of deep government cuts, they still want some increased border security, they've got some anti-LGBTQ and anti-abortion measures they want to include this go-around. However, while their demands haven't changed very much, their negotiation strategy is a little bit different this time. And that's because they remember how Kevin McCarthy failed them in the debt ceiling negotiations. President Biden and Senate Democrats got a lot more of what they wanted in that bill than what the far right wing of the House conference wanted, and therefore, they're probably not going to trust Kevin McCarthy to negotiate this time. And if he starts to drift towards the center again and look to pass something bipartisan the same way that the debt ceiling increase was passed, they might actually pull the trigger on removing him from the speakership and shutting down the House completely. Because their constituents kind of want to see Washington burn, and they're pretty excited when they see things not working because they think they're sticking it to the libs, the establishment, the swamp, whomever. And so, while shutting down the government and blockading the House isn't probably in the best interest of their constituents, these members of the far right would actually be pretty accurately representing the will of their constituents, and therefore it's probably the smartest political decision for the Freedom Caucus and its allies. Next up we have Kevin McCarthy, and I honestly do not envy his current position. He is trying to cobble together a coalition from the disparate wings of his party, and that is a tall task. On the one hand, you have the 18 members of the Republican caucus who come from districts that Biden won in 2020. Now, on the other hand, you have the MAGA wing of the party. And there's not a lot of common ground between the two, quite frankly. And since Kevin only has a 4-seat majority, there's not a lot he can do. And his goal in all of this is really just to stay speaker as long as possible. So he's going to be talking out of both sides of his mouth in order to try and assuage both these groups in order to pass something. That's what he managed to do during the debt ceiling crisis. However, immediately after the thing passed, everybody ran away from it. And I don't think he thinks he can pull that off a second time. And right now, he is growing a little bit of a spine, because his attitude has become, I'm going to take this up for a vote. Whatever's going to happen, and you know what? If you're going to remove me, do it. I dare you. Let's go. Light this candle. Of course, he used a couple of expletives, but this is a family-friendly channel. I'm not going to repeat those lines. But for Kevin, really, this is just a matter of survival, and he's going to keep saying and doing whatever he can in order to stay in power for as long as possible. Lastly, we have the Democratic Party. Now, President Biden and Senate Democrats are in pretty much the same position they were during the debt ceiling crisis, and they're probably going to play their cards the same way because, hey, it worked for them last time, it's got a decent chance of working again. But House Republicans are actually in a very interesting position depending on what happens to Kevin McCarthy. If he gets removed as Speaker, the House shuts down until a new Speaker is elected. Now, if it happens after a government funding bill is passed and there's no threat of a shutdown, they probably just let him go and they just let Republicans bicker amongst themselves until a new Speaker is selected. However, if a government spending bill hasn't been passed when Kevin McCarthy is removed, things get a little bit more complicated. If there's no Speaker of the House can't conduct any business, and therefore a government shutdown is a guarantee. Now, in the short term, it will be blamed on Republicans because of all the Republican House chaos. However, Americans have a bad habit of attributing everything going on in the nation to the president, whether it's good or bad, and quite frankly, whether the president had anything to do with it or not. So when there are the inevitable economic consequences of the government shutdown, those might be blamed on President Biden. And going into an election year, that's something that Democrats would like to avoid. Now, if they want to keep it very short term, they might simply say, hey, Kevin, we need to keep the government open, so we will back you as the Speaker through this crisis, we'll get something passed the same way we did the debt ceiling, but after that, you're on your own. Best of luck. However, I could see an avenue where Democrats decide to support him for a little bit longer, because if Kevin McCarthy works with Democrats in the same way that he did during the debt ceiling crisis, he's going to be politically toxic to the Freedom Caucus, and there's no way they're ever going to be able to back him again, because he will at that point have become a rhino in their eyes. But that also means that Kevin McCarthy doesn't have to listen to them anymore, because, quite frankly, what are they going to do to him? He already knows they're not going to vote for anything he puts forward, so he might as well cement his legacy as Speaker and pass some other major pieces of legislation in a mostly bipartisan fashion. And given that we know that all Kevin really cares about is being Speaker, I don't think he really cares who he's catering to ideologically, as long as he gets to cement his legacy. However, the Democratic Party could also try and replace Kevin McCarthy with the Speaker of their choosing. There are currently 18 Republicans representing districts that Joe Biden won in 2020, so it's not that far-fetched of an idea that a couple of them could be peeled away in order to create a majority for the Democratic coalition. That being said, the Speaker would not end up being Hakeem Jeffries or anyone like him, because if those Republicans voted for a Democrat while there's a Republican House majority, they would be immediately primaried, and there's no way they would survive that primary challenge. So I think we might see a compromise candidate that doesn't come from within the House of Representatives, because that would remove some of the politics from the issue. There's no actual requirement that the Speaker of the House be a member of the House, and by bringing in someone from the outside, it might actually give a lot of cover to some of those 18 Republicans to say, hey, we've picked a nonpartisan Speaker because obviously the Republican majority can't figure anything out, but we also can't support a Democratic Speaker because that's not what our constituents want. So, by picking this compromise candidate, they appear bipartisan, they haven't betrayed their primary voters, they haven't betrayed their general election voters, and those 18 Republicans can feel pretty safe in their re-election prospects. Of course, avoiding the issue of them being tied to all of the other Republicans. But that's another story. And for the Democrats, they get to take control of the House, effectively, or at least take that control away from Kevin McCarthy, and more importantly, from the far right wing of the Republican Party. All that being said, there's still a lot that could happen, so we'll have to wait and see how all this plays out. But if the far right isn't happy with how Kevin McCarthy handles this issue, and they do decide to follow through on their threat to remove him, Democrats will have the opportunity to exert a lot more influence in the House than they would usually be able to as the minority. And they could use that power to set themselves in a very good position for the 2024 election cycle. Think about it.